All right, looks like we're ready to go here. So we've been working on a Workbench project. This is for an online class that we're going to be doing. It's coming up. So Dennis and I thought it would be good to just kind of show you guys kind of the state it's in right now. We're about halfway through it. We've got the base built. So a couple of things here while we've got it dry assembled. When we started out, we talked about using 2x4s from the lumber yard and stuff like that, which is how I built my first bench, and I still have that bench. The problem with 2x4s is obviously that it's hard to find a good 2x4, and they're twisted, and even if you do get a straight one, it's going to end up twisting. And if you've ever tried to rip a 2x4, you know, take those rounded edges off and stuff, if that board's twisted, it's kind of one of the most dangerous things you can rip is a 2x4 because it wants to bind and kick back. So we opted not to use 2x4 construction, and I know there's a lot of plans out there that use them and all that, but what we did decide is that we wanted to use a dimensional lumber that you could get from the home center, so we decided on 1x4s, and those are typically a little flatter. You know, you can get them in pine and stuff like that. There's a guy here in the store that also used 3/4 inch Baltic birch. So he had 5 layers of Baltic birch put together to make up his laminations. So this bench is all laminated together with 3/4 inch hickory that's all been cut at 3/4 of an inch by 3.5 inches, which is the same size as a 1x4. So when you decide to do that, there's pros and cons to it. One of the biggest things is that you got to laminate everything up. So you've got 3 pieces laminated, and the challenge there is getting everything lined up. So we talked about ways to line things up, and we'll go through some of that. And then when you do laminate it, you also got to clean up those joints, you know, depending on how far they're off. And so we'll go through that a little bit too. But so we've got a couple of end assemblies that we put together. It's all mortise and tenon. And of course we created the mortises and the tenons in our lamination when we put it together, when we laminated them up. So we didn't have to really cut big tenons or anything like that on the table saw. It was all sort of pre-done with the design as part of the lamination. Now we got a couple of rails and stiles. Those are laminated up 2 pieces, 1.5 by 3.5. And then the lower rails are laminated up as well. And then we've got a little bit of a rabbet on the end, and those are going to get lag screwed into those legs then. So anyway, fairly basic construction, but good solid bench. Another little nugget here is this Workpiece hold down. And what this is for is once we get our top on, we haven't actually built the top yet, but we'll have the top, we'll have a vise on that end and a vise on this end. But the vise on that end, I don't know if you guys have ran into it, but if you've got a long board that you need to work on, you know, you can clamp it in one end, but you need a way to hold it on the other end. So we came up with this mount. So this is a Workpiece mount, and you can lay your board right there. Actually slide this in first, lay your board right there, and then clamp it in place. And then between the vise and this Workpiece support, you can, you know, work on your edges or anything like that. So this will be adjustable up and down. So I'll get into that here in just a little bit. But yeah, fairly simple, but that's going to be a real handy thing. I think we're even going to do a set on this side where we don't have any vices. So we'll have 2 Workpiece supports where we can just clamp them. And kind of the nice thing with that too is that we're using this micro jig clamp with the dovetail key in it. So we routed a dovetail groove here, and that just slides in. And then we'll talk about how we're mounting it to the leg here in just a little bit. So anyway, you know, and a lot of this is going to be pretty basic for you guys, but you know, that's where we're starting. We're assuming that this is a workbench for somebody who's just getting started. So I'll just kind of go through the tips that we came up with as we went. So our goal here again was to create tenons and then conversely mortises for all that to fit together. So one of the challenges, let me grab a square here. One of the challenges when you clamp this stuff up is how do you get these shoulders all aligned? You know, if you're machining those on a table saw, it's a little easier because you'd set up a stop and you could cut them and they'd all be the same. But when you're gluing things up, you know, it's pretty easy for things to start sliding around. Before you know it, you're off. So what we did is we took the time to create some saddles. And these are just made out of MDF. And this space right here is 3.5 inches, so it matches the tenon length. So when we go to glue these up, it's actually a guide for us to start. And now we can clamp that, you know, we clamp this in place, clamp these up, and then pull this off. And then we know that these two shoulders are aligned. So you're taking a little bit of time to make this kind of stuff, but if you've got a bunch of them to do, it's just an easier way and it just kind of keeps you on track. We also created the opposite of that, where we've got a tenon or a mortise version. And that way we can just come in here, use that as our spacer, get our laminations done, pull it back out again. So pretty good way to do it. The other thing we did, and a few of you have probably laminated things up before, but one of the challenges I find is that stuff just slides around all over the place. And controlling how much squeeze out that you get and stuff like that is an issue too. How much glue do you put on? If you don't put enough on, then it doesn't, you know, get out to the outside edge of the joint, and then you got a little bit of a gap, you know, and nobody likes that. But if you put too much glue on, it just comes out everywhere, you know, and you've got it all over the place. So one thing I've been doing is on these types of laminations is I'm actually sawing some saw kerfs in this middle section. And that's for glue to sort of squeeze into, and that way we don't get quite so much squeeze out. It also allows this board to be just a little flatter. So, you know, when you cut kerfs into it like that, it's a little bit more flexible. And when you go to clamp it, that helps keep things flat. So, ran all the kerfs and all those center pieces. It also works when...
How deep did you make this? It looks pretty shallow. Come on in.
Yeah, we actually cut them a little deeper on the actual one. We were probably about a 16th. These are about a 32nd. It's not super critical, you know, how deep they are. If you had some wood that was kind of twisty, cut them a little deeper, and that'll help you just laminate things up and keep it flat. But, you know, you'll see this like on, I don't know if you've noticed, like moldings and stuff like that. A lot of times they'll kerf the back edges of those so things lay flat. And that's why you see that. Or for like caulking and stuff like that, when they use adhesives to put trim and stuff like that on. So I'll pass that around, kind of give you an idea. But it's pretty simple. You're just setting the fence and cutting some kerfs. The other interesting thing is what you're going to do for clamps. Clamps are expensive, and I think we're all guilty of not having enough clamps. You know, you can never have enough clamps, right, Dennis? He's got all of them, so he wouldn't know that.
I'm pretty good on clamps.
But anyway, it's easy to skimp on clamps, and it's easy to sort of miss the boat on, well, what kind of clamps should you have? Well, one kind of clamp that I've never really had in my shop are these Bessie K bodies. And I've avoided them because of the cost. You know, they're very expensive. But after using them here in the shop, it's certainly something that I'm going to add to my shop. Because not only can you clamp things up with it, but you can also use those clamps to align things as well. The other nice thing about the clamp is that these are perfectly straight up and down. So whether I clamp here, here, or here, that's always going to be guaranteed to be 90 degrees. So that's pretty nice. The other thing is that the bar is fairly heavy duty compared to, say, I'm not going to take that off, but even compared to something like this, you know, if you put a lot of clamping pressure on this, you're going to start to see this bend. Well, when that happens, then you've got basically these start tilting out a little bit, and then you start getting, you know, things slide around and stuff. So the other key point here is that it takes a lot of clamps just to do just this one piece. So I'm going to go through real quick and just show you kind of my routine for clamping something like this up. I'm not going to glue it, but it'll give you a rough idea of kind of how many clamps you need. So the first thing, any questions so far? Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is clamp that end block in place. And then Dennis and I talked about, do you clamp it up? And I'm guilty of this too, but I typically would clamp something up like this. The disadvantage is that if you got paper down on your bench, you got glue squeezing out of the bottom, it's certainly going to glue to that paper. The other thing is that I'm not able to adjust these very well either. So if you look real close here, even though these were all cut on the table saw with the same setting, I got a little bit of a lip here. So that either indicates that board was wider than the other, or it cupped a little bit, had a little bit of twist in it when I cut it. So if I clamp it up in this orientation, then I can move all that around. Plus I can clean up some of that squeeze out. And the other advantage is that when you're clamping like this, you put glue on this board and then you turn it, it's all gonna just start running downward. So luckily, these clamps, another nice thing to them is that they stand straight up and down on their own. So we'll just go ahead and get this set up here. I also like these pads. They won't stick to the glue, so that's pretty handy. So I've got a couple of boards there. We'll get our other piece on here. And I always like to kind of go through and dry clamp things first, just to make sure I'm not making any mistakes, because once it's glued, it's glued. So I'll just put a little bit of medium pressure on there, not a whole lot. And keep in mind, it's going to want to slide around a little bit. But like I said, now that you can have access to both sides, you can really just kind of run your finger across that and see if everything's aligned. So another little trick.
I think you actually, when you did that, you actually tried to pull those boards in against the clamp rail too, didn't you? I mean, so it was kind of helped you get things lined up. And
Yes, against this back edge.
yeah.
Yeah. So another way that these clamps work really well is just for alignment this way. That's why I sort of put medium pressure on here, because now I can take these two clamps and use those as an alignment guide. These are a little older style Bessies, but they do the same thing. Well, now I'm pretty much guaranteed that everything's aligned this way, You know, the longer you get though, you know, you still could have a little bit of a gap here. So that's where I like these. And these are what I call persuaders because they're super heavy duty. I mean, you can clamp, you can ruin things with these things. But let's say I've got this piece sticking out a little bit too far. What I can do is intentionally cock that clamp just a little bit. And now I'm just pulling that section in and it's nice and flat. So, so I've got that clamp there. I'm gonna add another. Most of the time I'm just looking at squeeze out and stuff like that, just to see if I'm getting good clamping pressure. And usually, you know, I've got everything locked down here. You know, don't be surprised if, you know, you got squeeze out here and here, but nothing here. Well, that's when I get another persuader out and really put the hammer down on it. So there you go. I mean, it looks like a mess. I mean, look how many clamps are just on that one piece. But that's kind of what it's about, though, is making sure, you know, you do your dry run. You're kind of getting a sense of where you're going to be, and you need to have enough clamps. So that's important. And then, of course, you can take this piece off now. So now we know that we've got our tenon. That's the perfect length. And then after we get it glued up, a couple of ways to clean up the glue. Does anybody use the water and rag trick? So I've done that too, and it sort of drives me crazy because you're always trying to find a new piece of the rag to clean off, and the water kind of raises the grain and it gets to be a mess. But what I really like to do is just let the glue tack up a little bit and gum up, and then just come in with either a chisel or like a paint scraper, and then just come in and start cleaning those joints up. And when it gets to that gummy state, then you can just kind of peel it out. So just kind of some gluing basics there. So after that, any questions so far about these? I will say that these Bessies take a little getting used to, but when you use these things, you kind of have to get used to how those move. I mean, they're a little clunky, you know, but if you angle this right, then they'll move up and down. So it just takes a little getting used to. These are nice for like gluing up cabinet doors and stuff like that, because you're not going to induce twist into those doors. You have very many Bessies, Dennis?
I have, yeah, a lot.
Why does that not surprise me? Best thing to do is just get 4 and then get 4 the next week, and just get 4 on every payday.
There you go.
Any questions?
On your little jig there, the mortise one looks like it's a lot longer than the...
Yeah, so the reason for that is that you'll see here on the bench, I've got these overhangs. Mm-hmm. So that one's sized for those overhangs. And then you'll also notice we put a dado. It's actually not a dado that was cut, but we actually cut a little spacer for that too and clamped it in place. So we had this on the end, our spacer for the dado, and then clamped it up based on that. But yeah, if you didn't have overhangs, you could just do this as 3.5 as well to match your width. So you can just kind of custom make these to any size you want. So the next thing that you'll run into, or we ran into, and I'm gonna break this thing down. You know, I've ran into things too where you think you got everything fitting pretty well, and then you go to glue it, and it's not quite in the right spot. and it like locks in place, you know, and then you're like in panic mode. You just, at that point, you just have to use a good heavy duty clamp to persuade it back in place, and nothing wrong with that.
This would be called Kim's vise.
Yeah, this is kind of a, we don't have a vise for this thing, so so the next thing you're going to run into is you're going to have boards that have glue on the edges and stuff like that. Couple of ways to deal with that. I know this is basic, but I don't know. It's the basic things that seem to make the difference. My shop, I have just a regular paint scraper. It's one of those steel ones, and I usually sharpen it, and sometimes I'll roll the edge with a screwdriver to get a little curl on the edge. Has anybody ever done that? So, so it's cheap Red Devil paint scraper is what it is, and I use it basically just to scrape the glue off of things. Dennis and I came across this in the store, which is the same thing, except it's got a carbide blade on it, and it's reversible. So not only does it scrape glue off, but if you've got some uneven edges, you can really use it kind of like a hand plane in a way. I mean, it really gets a pretty nice little curl there, so this is a pretty handy little tool. Like I said, you don't sharpen these blades once they become dull, you just reverse them. Once the blade's done, you just go buy another blade, so you don't even have to do any sharpening. The other thing, it's got a nice handle on top, and I can really get aggressive with it. Another way to clean things up is with like a sanding block. And I like to just go straight to, or start with an 80 grit on this kind of stuff, if I've got saw marks and stuff to remove. This is kind of your typical sanding block. Works fine. The one thing that I find is that if I do a long block like this, now I can really put some leverage on that thing. You know, I've got a nice long sanding block. Not only am I really keeping it flat, but I mean, that dust is just rolling right off there. So by having that block long, I'm really getting a lot of pressure and a lot of leverage on it. So PSA sandpaper, just a piece of scrap Baltic birch, clean those edges up in no time. The other thing that we talked about was you can also take these pieces that are glued up once you have the glue scraped off to the table saw and rip them. Now, if you're going to do that and you want to make sure that these stay at 3.5 inches, you need to start with at least a 1/16 extra, maybe an eighth of an inch extra, because the saw blade is going to take just a hair off when you clean those edges up. Now, that's a nice way to do it. If you've got 3 laminations, it's a pretty substantial cut to make with the table saw. So I usually raise the blade about halfway up, about half the thickness, just over half the thickness of the stock, and just cut it in 2 passes. And it just doesn't work the blade so much. I also find that you don't get burning and stuff like that either. But that is one thing, is if you go to the table saw, you could put a big burn mark in this, and that's not going to be fun to sand out either. So yeah, you just kind of have to weigh the lesser of the evils and pick your poison and decide how you want to do that. But if you do go to the table saw, make sure and have a whole bunch of feather boards in place, so that's not wandering around. That'll make all the difference in the world. So anyway, that's a good way to get your edges all cleaned up for laminating. Any questions so far?
You can also use a hand plane.
Could do that too. Yeah. The only thing, and we talked about that, the only thing that I've found with the hand plane is if you have 3 laminations and you have a grain pattern that's flopped in the middle, then the two that are running the right way will curl off, the middle one will actually chip. You know what I'm saying?
Possibly.
So,
Unless you're adjusting the plane just right.
yeah, you definitely could use a hand plane.
Very thin.
Yeah. And you know, to be honest, that's something I have 2 hand planes and I don't use them a whole lot, but I don't have really good ones. And I don't have some fairly long ones either.
Yep.
So that's on my list of stuff to get at some point, is some really good hand planes.
This number 62 is a really nice plane.
Well, there you go. Well, you need to do a class here.
Did everyone hear that? Yep, okay.
Oh, that would be a great class to do, actually. You know, just go through the different types of scrapers and planes and stuff like that, and then the sharpening to them too. So, anybody have a Work Sharp 3000 here? Yeah. Well, they quit making that, so you can't even get that anymore. It was probably the world's easiest way to sharpen things. So if you have one, keep hold of it. It might be worth.
Or they just quit making it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just discontinued it, and it's like, we used to sell the heck out of them. If you do sharpen one of those paint scrapers, mount it in a vise, take a screwdriver, go over across the edge, and it'll just put a little micro curl on the edge of that steel, and it'll be razor sharp. So that's pretty nice, and it'll curl the wood off pretty good then. So that's just a good way to do it. But well, we'll move on to the next thing here. I'm gonna take this apart real quick. Try and do it without doing too much damage here. Hickory's hard stuff. Has anybody made anything out of hickory before? It's pretty nice stuff, but it can be a little twisty. But it's certainly pretty dense. Oh, one other little thing. I'll grab the right one here. Yeah, this is the one. You'll also notice when we put these together, we left these tenons just a little bit shy, because if you leave them flush or even proud, they're not going to be any fun to sand off, because end grain's no fun to sand. So if you're doing something like this, you're not going to see this joint. Don't be afraid to leave those down a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch. That way it's a whole lot of less problems when you go to put that top on. So I was talking about that workpiece support earlier. Ignore this dowel, it was drilled in the wrong spot. So to make this adjustable, because we've only got so much travel here for where this clamp can go. You know, we've got probably 6-7 inches, maybe 8. What we're going to do is we're going to drill a series of holes in that upright piece on the end, and then we're going to put a 1/2 inch dowel in each hole, and then this is basically just going to hook on there. And so we'll have a series of dowels on there, and then you can adjust it. If you've got a piece that's 24 inches wide, then you'll put it on the bottom one. If you've got a piece that's 6 inches wide, you can put it on the dowel up here. So anyway, that's kind of how that's going to work. You'll also notice that on these pieces, that we've got this groove in here. Originally, that was just sort of a design element that the project designer thought was kind of nice, but we utilized that when we made this jig, and we have this little lip here that just happens to fit in there. So it's just a nice little way for that whole thing to work. So this is where all of our holes are going to be for those dowels. And of course, you know, we've been filming all this while we build this thing, so we're filming it as we learn things. And like we all do, we forgot to do a few steps before we glued this thing up. And one of them was all these holes. The other thing is that we've got, let's see here, where is that? Okay, I got it. We've got our upper rail with that dado up here. And the way that's going to be held in place is with a barrel bolt. So we're going to have a hole centered in the end, then a hole in the end of the board, and then a hole for that nut to fit into. So that's going to fit through there like that. Well, I forgot to drill that hole before I laminated these up, and I was going to drill it on the drill press. Well, it's too late. I can't do that now. So I got to figure out how to do these holes and all these holes. So we talked about different ways to do it. You know, you could use a drill guide like this Miles Craft drill guide. Nice brad point bit. You know, come down there and drill that out. I think it would work fine, but you don't have a lot of surface here. And if you're trying to get holes that are in exactly the same spot all the way down the line here, the chances of me nailing that is not very good. So we opted not to do that, but that would certainly be a way to do it. So what we decided to do is do a little template routing. So I've got a template here with all the holes. These were all drilled with a Forstner bit on the drill press. I set up a fence so I know my spacing this way is consistent all the way around. So now I can just set this in place where those holes are going to go. And then to route those, we're going to use a 1/4 inch straight bit because we've got to route a 1/2 inch hole, 1/2 inch deep, along with a guide bushing. So you can get these guide bushings in all kinds of different sizes. My router that I have here, I don't know if you can see it here, Dennis. I thought the base would just accept the guide bushings, but it doesn't. The hole's too big. So this is an aftermarket guide bushing kit for it, and it just screws in from the bottom. And then it allows these guide bushings to be inserted. This is kind of what they look like. So it's just got a nut and then the guide bushing itself. Like I said, you can get these in different diameters then, depending on what size hole or slot you're going to cut. So in this case, I'm using a 3/4 inch guide bushing with a 1/4 inch straight bit. So what size hole do I need here? What?
1/2 inch? Or no, 1 inch.
1 inch? How about 1 1/8?
Okay.
No, that's wrong. The first one I cut at 1 1/8, and I was cutting 5/8 inch holes. So you're right, 1 inch is the magic number there. So you got to do the math on that, and if you're going to do this, do some test cuts first, make sure that it's going to work. So, because Dwayne was right, I was just messing with him. But anyway, I thought, well, since we haven't cut it yet, I'd go on ahead and cut these just here in the class. You know, and it's kind of like Dennis's shaper in a way. It's kind of a poor man's shaper. But the nice thing about a router is that it's going to route all these holes just spot on. You know, a drill bit tends to chip things out. You know, the top surface can get chipped. You know, we were even talking about using a Forstner bit, you know, to drill it. Well, if you've ever drilled by hand with a Forstner bit, getting it started is an issue. And then even after you get it started, it will tend to wander. So the deeper you get, the way it pulls, the way it grabs, it tends to pull. So if you drilled a hole and then you cut it in half to see the cross section, you'd see the hole would be slightly angular. So I've run into that quite a few times. And then a lot of Forstner bits don't have much of a point on them either, so trying to get them started is an issue. And it's also hard to find the center line when you're drilling them. So we're just going to go on ahead and route this. Any questions on this before I get started? Has anybody done any template routing? No? Not even the wise guy in the back?
Have to buy another router.
So you can clamp this in place, and that's fine. One thing I ran into, and you will too if you do this, these template or these guide bushings are different heights. So the kit that I have are just aluminum, and you'll notice that they're really like shallow. I don't think I trimmed these, but usually when I get these, I sand them, and I'll take about half that off because I usually don't need more than this. But lo and behold, my router that I have, this Bosch, and this adapter, that's sitting down in there about 1/4 of an inch. So all my guide bushings I have now don't even work. So I had to pull this one off the floor. So that's a good thing that this one's longer. The other thing you'll run into is that the aluminum versions, for some reason, this nut is a little sloppier than the brass versions. And I've had these rattle loose while I'm routing. So one thing you can do to prevent that is put Teflon tape, like what plumbers use. Just wrap that and then put the nut on. And I usually take just like a wrench and just kind of cinch it down just to make sure it won't rattle loose. But you'd be amazed, there's a lot of vibration that comes off these routers, and it rattles these darn aluminum bushings loose half the time. The brass ones tend to seat a little better, and I think it's because that metal's just a little softer. So if you're gonna get a set, I'd skip the aluminum ones and just go straight to the brass ones. So just a little tip there. And like I said, if this is too long, just take it over the sander or file it off a little bit. And lo and behold, this is sticking down 1/4 of an inch, and I've got 1/4 inch hardboard. So this bushing just touches the surface of this board. So what I'm gonna do, instead of using clamps, is I'm gonna use some double-sided tape. And the advantage of that is I don't have to have a clamp either. But that's gonna lift it up just a little bit and give me a little bit of clearance as well. And this is one of those things, you gotta have this for your shop too. Double-sided tape. Man, it's just,
You got double-sided tape? Huh?
No, I ain't got any. I got one side. I'll get some for
I'll help you find it.
I'll get some before I go.
I'll help you find it.
it's a lot less than a router. Or a Rikon bandsaw for that matter.
China too, that too.
Yeah. You know, you never know.
He ain't smart enough to make double sided.
Anyway, this stuff's super handy to have in the shop, so get yourself a roll, or 2, or 3. We are going to have a class on how to set up a shop.
When's that?
I don't know, when is that, Dennis?
I don't know when that is. This first I'm hearing of it.
Well, you were going to do it, right?
Oh,
Yes?
Well, we did a seminar at the old store that was setting up a small shop, and there's some really interesting ideas in there about where to put your table saw and why. Well, a lot of guys put their table saws right in the middle of the shop. You really don't need to do that. So the smartest guy I know, which is my dad, he has his table saw up against a wall. So this end is up against the wall, and really you can't rip any further than that anyway. So I mean, having it out in the middle, there's no advantage to having it out there. So he has his up against the wall, and then his miter gauge stand runs right across the top of it, so he can roll it out a little bit if he needs, but tuck it in. Because for the most part, most of the time you're just ripping an 8-inch wide board. You're not even ripping 24 inches or anything like that. So especially with track saws these days, I mean, I don't know, I don't really rip any plywood. Plywood's on my table saw anymore. So anyway, it's stuff like that, and is sort of a prelude to the dust collection thing that we're talking about. And
In other words, they don't want to see my shop because mine doesn't fit that rule at all.
well,
Table saws
yeah,
in the middle of the.
that's okay. That's your shop. You can do whatever you
The only
want.
way I could get the truck in the car.
Okay, that's cool. I hear you. All right. So I am going to, one thing we should check here before we get too far into this, see how far we are. So that's running pretty deep. I'm going to be about 1/4 of an inch above that. Okay. So I just set it for 1/2 inch deep. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come around here with my turret. Try and set this here. So that's going to be our deepest setting. So then when I start, I'm going to set this turret over. That's only going to let me go so deep. Matter of fact, I'll start there. Everybody following me there? Okay. All right, well, let's give this a whirl, shall we? You ready, Dennis? You think this is going to work?
You better, because that's a real live piece, Ben.
I know it. You'd have to make a new one if this doesn't work. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm thinking somebody's gonna have to.
All right. Give it a shot. Fire in the hole. The bushing came loose, didn't it?
It did.
There we go. Yeah, those things are... I guess you got to put a drop of super glue on them.
You probably never router. Yeah, throw that router away.
Oops. All right, let's give that a try.
I think you just set up the bit depth. You're having trouble getting the depth, weren't you?
Yeah, I was actually...
I think if you bottomed it out on the hardboard and then raised that thing up.
Right.
1/2 inch, that would give you the 1/2 inch.
Right. So I've got to go 3/4 of an inch, basically, because of the hardboard. So we're going to want that 1/2 inch above. Oops. Okay, that's better. Get our turret set up here. All right, give this another whirl here. Okay, one thing it is doing is I've got that tape running on the inside edge here, and the guide bushing's hitting that tape. So that is not going to work because we're getting an oblong hole here.
Really?
So yeah, you can kind of see it right here.
Oh,
See the way that's bunching up there? That's what you guys like, right? Is the, the stuff that doesn't work?
didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Is this the first mistake you've ever made there?
Oh no, no.
Why can't you clamp it more? Oh, okay.
We could clamp it. I'd clamp it, but I'm using that tape as a spacer because the guide bearings too, or the guide bushing's just a little too long.
Which is why you want to drill the holes before you clamp it up or glue it up.
There's that too. Okay. All right. Give her another whirl here. That went a little better. So I've got pretty nice holes all the way down there. Those dowels should fit in there pretty well. So anyway, it's a handy way to do it. Like I said, I've got this hole up here too. That I need to do. I could drill it, but the one thing that the router does that just a hand drill wouldn't do, so I'm going to get that hole perfectly straight up and down. So it's just a really nice way to machine it. So in this case, I've just got a single hole for that. Now, this hole is only 3/8, where these are 1/2 inch, but I'm going to use the same size guide bushing. So Dwayne, what do I got to do on this piece?
For your hole,
Yeah.
it's going to be what, 3/8, 1/2 inch? Yep.
Yeah, a little bit smaller.
What he said.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm using the same guide bushing and all that, just different size hole in the template. And that's going to give me a 3/8 inch hole. One thing we may run into here is that I don't know if I can get all the way through that 1.5 inch thickness with that router bit, because it's only a 1/4 inch bit and it's only so long. So I'll go as deep as I can and then finish it up with the drill. I may get some blowout on the backside from the drill, but that's okay because it's all covered up. You know, that's all going to be sitting inside that rabbet. So anyway, a little primer on template routing. I would say after that brass one came loose, use the plumber's tape on both of them. So anyway, any questions on that? Nice thing is you can do, you know, if you need to do a slot out in the middle of something, you can create the slot here and just template route your slots. So it's another good way to do it. So the last thing we're going to cover is our workbench top. So I'll get this out of the way. And we've been having discussions on tops in general and vices and where do the vices go, all that stuff. And of course we've got this Craig table. When we first put this together, we were thinking, man, these holes are nice because you can slip those clamps in wherever you want and stuff. Well, it's also a great place for little parts to fall through and hardware when you assemble things. I tend to catch things on these things too. Traditional bench would just have maybe a row of bench dog holes for the vise, maybe one running this way and one running this way. So Dennis and I aren't real big fans of having all these holes in the top, especially Dennis.
I thought it was great to begin with until I started using it, and then all of a sudden, it just, you throw down a handful of screws and all of a sudden, plink, 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 and
Right.
gosh dang
Not
it.
to mention the dust.
Yeah, and the other annoying thing
Yeah,
here is that when you go to clamp and stuff, you're dealing with these rails. Well, you'll notice this bench just has a center rail in it, so I'm not impeded by anything on this edge. So if you are looking at benches or thinking about building one, just consider that. It's not like I can't clamp onto that, but if I want to go beyond it, you know, then the jaw is on the back side of that, and it just gets kind of clunky. So, uh-oh. So what we're going to do, we're going to do something a little different with our top.
drum roll, Dwayne, drum roll.
It's too much pressure, Dennis. Too much pressure. Love the idea of a solid bench top, but it's a lot of work. So we were going to go with 2 layers of 3/4 inch MDF, edge band it, maybe put a piece of 1/4 inch hardboard on top that you could remove if you wanted to. But we just, after working with this hickory, it's like that's such pretty stuff. And so how nice would it be to just have a solid hickory top? Well, you could do that, but you're going to have to rip 1 3/4 or 2 inch wide boards. You're going to have to laminate all those together. That's a deal. I mean, that's a lot of gluing up. It's a lot of lumber. So the bench I have at home that I built out of oak, I did like this. So the center is 3/4 inch MDF, and then I edge banded with a couple of 3/4 by 3/4 inch pieces around the entire perimeter, sanded all that flush, and then just laid 3/8 inch thick strips. These are just ripped off the edge of a board over the top and the bottom. So what you get is you get sort of a bench top that more or less looks like a solid top, but you're not going to all that trouble and using all that lumber to create that solid top. So I'll pass this around a little bit. You guys can check it out.
Did you glue the strips to the MDF?
I did, and the way I did it at home, a couple of things I learned when I did it at home. I ripped the strips because I had a whole bunch of, I don't know why, but I had a whole bunch of like 3/16 inch strips of oak left over. And I had just like piles of oak everywhere. And it's like, what am I gonna do with all this oak? You know, it's just sitting in the shop, it's everywhere. You know, am I ever gonna use it? But you can't burn it or throw it away. So, and I only have so much space. So I thought, well, I've built this really nice red oak base. I want a red oak top. And so I ripped all those strips to 13/16 inches wide. I did 2 layers of MDF for my base. And then I took the 3/16 inch strips, and most of it was out of like 1.5 inch stock. So I had 1.5 inch wide strips. And I basically air nailed all those strips onto that MDF, and then trimmed it. I actually trimmed the edges afterwards then. Well, I came back the next morning and it curled. The whole bench did this. And that's because what I did was I put a wet surface on one side, and the back side's...
You glued it and then pinned it.
Yeah, and so the back side didn't have that moisture that the glue had on this surface, so it curled overnight. So I had to set up basically a trammel system, a flattening system, and flatten it all after I was done. So, and you'll find that, like, if you've ever looked at a countertop, like a laminate countertop, you'll notice that they have a backer sheet on it. That's to keep it from curling. So you have adhesive on both sides. So the glue I was using was just probably Titebond or something like that. So anyway, lesson learned there. And of course, I only made those strips 3/16, so when I flattened it, it's like I came real close to going through some of that probably, and I was hitting nails and stuff, you know, little tiny nails, but yeah, not exactly real router bit friendly. So, you know, the more Dennis and I start talking about it, it's like, well, part of the problem was that the glue took a long time to set up. We've used this Quick and Thick for a lot of different things. So just to give you an example, I was here at, I don't know, 8:30 or 9 o'clock this morning, and I glued all this edging on this piece. And then 20 minutes later, I took it to the table saw and cleaned it up. So it dries really fast, and it's a really thick consistency. So you're gonna have less problems with curl on that. The other thing I would advise is that try to do the top and the back side both identical. So I didn't do that on my bench, I just did it on the top. So if you lay all these strips on the top, the same day, flip it over, glue the strips on the bottom then too, and you shouldn't get that curl then. So the other nice thing is that I didn't use any clamps other than tape on this edging. So, you know, it grabs a hold and it sort of sticks. But of course, you know, if you're doing a bench top this big and you've got one of these strips, there's a good chance it's gonna wanna pop up somewhere. So you may need to put a few pin nails in it. And when I'm talking pin nails, we have that nailer, Dennis? We're talking like tiny, tiny little nailer. Oh, there's no nails. You know where the nails are? There they are. Yep. Anyway, 23 gauge pin nailer. There's no head on these.
An open package 13.
So that's pretty nice. I mean, if you can set that to where it sets that little pin nail head just below the surface, you're never going to see them. Or you could fill them if you want. I'll pass that around, and you know, that'd be handy for nailing like little corner strips or any kind of little thing on a project. So anyway, I would probably pin nail it here and there. But the idea is that we're just starting with MDF. We're gluing our edging on. After that, I did trim up these edges on the table saw, or you can sand them. I did sand the top just to make sure there wasn't any, you know, variations as far as the MDF being below this or above it. But other than that, it's really just a matter of,
Why wouldn't you just left the MDF, varnish the MDF or something?
I just wanted it to look like a solid top.
Other than that, yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, that's the main reason.
Well, the other thing is that MDF doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's going to gouge and stuff easier, you know, and, you know, hardwood, it's just a little bit better surface to work on top of, I think. But yeah, it's mostly a visual thing, you know. I mean, you could certainly just do MDF. That's what these countertops are and stuff. That's just MDF. So yeah, it's kind of whatever you want to do.
The cap went through one of the holes.
Did it?
There you go. That's a reason not to do that.
So there's kind of a good example. I mean, that's it. I don't clamp it or anything. I just leave it alone. Then I go on to the next piece. I don't even edge glue these.
Now, if you use that, would you still use your pin nails then?
Probably, especially in the first piece, you know, because so it's not sliding around. And it just depends on how much. See, like right there, I'm getting a little bit of a gap. I don't know, we could try putting a little bit of glue on that edge and see if that makes a difference. But yeah, certainly having the pin nailer ready to go is not a bad idea. Well, it's pretty much holding.
I've used that quite a bit with moldings and stuff. Made a coffee table one time that had like 5 miles worth of molding.
5 miles?
Yeah, at least 5 miles.
That's why you need all the
And,
clamps.
yeah. Well, so I used this glue. It's the first time I'd ever used it, and I found that if the strip wasn't any more than about 36 inches long, I could glue the whole thing, and then I could put it down, and if I held it in place for like 10 to 15 seconds, I was in pretty good shape. And then after I got done, then I would take some blue tape, painter's tape, and I just tried to tape it a little bit. And
Right.
I don't know if the tape was doing any good or not, but I felt better doing it. And
That's how I did these edges. I used tape.
it worked really well. And it might not have been 5 miles, it might have been 6. But it was a lot of molding, you know.
Still got that, baby?
I wouldn't get rid of it. I was pretty proud of it when it was done, but oh man. And mine didn't want the pin nails, so that was really why I tried that glue out. And
Yeah, it's pretty handy stuff to have in the shop. There's no doubt about it. And I'm amazed at how fast it tacks up. But you know, this is going pretty good. I mean, they're all lining up pretty nice here. That one's being a little bit of a, did you say 10 seconds?
that's what I did, 10 to 15, and it generally worked.
They will be. We'll probably use shorter links and do butt joints and offset the joints.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you had said.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that one's not really wanting to pull in there, so I'm going to try going the other way.
when I glued, I wasn't that messy.
I know it. Look at that.
I know, you're out of control.
That's because I'm standing in front of these guys.
I know, it doesn't make a difference.
It seems to. Was anybody here for the stop loss bag seminar? When the finish went all over the place? You were.
I was really too full in there or something.
Oh, you're just a busy man, you know, I've never seen anybody so busy.
So anyway, you get the idea. I mean, that's just with that glue and short strips, I'm able to start building a solid wood, a top that looks like solid wood. So just like they do in China. If you've ever been to the IKEA store, and take a look at their furniture sometime and look at what they're doing with veneers. They look like they're solid wood and stuff, and even on the ends and stuff, but they're doing some amazing things with veneers. It's all veneers. It's not solid wood, but it looks like it. So this is kind of a riff on that in a way. And like I said, it's if you got a bunch of scrap lumber at home, rip it up and do a top. I mean, it won't cost you anything. And you get rid of all that darn lumber that's sitting around. So the last thing I'll add, once we get the top built, and we're going to do a part 2 on this, because you notice in the plans we've got a cabinet that's going to go below and stuff like that. There's a big debate on where the vices should go and which end. And for some reason, most of the vices that you see online in the plans, you'll see the vise on this end and then on this end. Well, for me, that's backwards, because if I'm wanting to saw something, that means I've got to use my left hand. So I can't hang on to the board here and saw it. So for me, I want the vise down here where I can clamp the piece in, use the hand that works right, and cut that board off. So now, not everybody agrees with me on that, but that's the way I'm going to do this bench.
He's not referring to me.
No, we're referring to Don Peschke, who did the show, you know, and for years and years, and we still talk to him quite a bit, and so he's got a strong opinion about where the vices should go, and I still can't figure out why they do it that way, but anyway, that's how we're going to set ours up. And
He's losing on this one, so.
did you hear that, Don?
Because we both agree on that, so.
Yeah.
So the way that you or prefer is matching the drawings?
Yes. Yep. Yep. And we'll go through step by step on how to do the bench dog holes and all that. Yeah, so eventually we'll have complete plans with dimensions and everything. But yeah, to answer your question, that's the route we're going to go with this. But you know, if you're building your bench, put the vise wherever you want. I've even thought sometimes it'd be nice to have a vise at both ends. But you know, that little end work support though, that almost becomes another little vise out there on the end. You know, you could use that to just clamp a board right here too.
Yep.
So, because we're gonna have one here and then we're gonna have a set of those outboard out here so we can go around the other side of the bench and use it. So, but, all right, any questions?
There was a reason, I can't remember what it was, but why they always put the face vise on the left side.
Could be.
Maybe was it for edge planing that you wanted the support?
I don't know.
Because then if you're planing, you're
Oh,
going.
it could be. Well, see, I don't do any hand planing. So,
Problem solved.
yeah, maybe that's why. It certainly could be.
I know
Yeah.
I read someplace, there was a reason that you
Yeah.
put it on the left side, but I can't
Yeah.
remember. Edge planing is the only thing I can think of.
Dwayne,
Yes.
do you have an opinion on whether the vise should be here or here?
From what I've read and my experiences, depends on whether you're right-handed or left-handed.
Oh. Okay.
Most of the time I've seen the vise if you're right-handed, the vise is on the left side for some reason, and opposite.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
me being left-handed, when I built my bench and put the vise on it, I put it on the left side. But it's worked out okay,
Yeah.
because when I'm using a hand plane and I'm just like taking saw marks off the edge of a board,
Yeah.
I'm going from left to right.
Sure. Which is kind of what you were talking about. So.
So probably it doesn't matter. I could see the argument, and I would try to think, well, if I'm left-handed and I put the vise on the right, maybe I'm still going the same way. I don't know, maybe there's no difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. To me,
Well-
it works out for the vise to be on the left-hand side.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we were talking about putting it on the right-hand side because, like, if I'm cutting a board off,
Right.
this is my hand, and I want that piece to fall off here
And that would-
versus sawing with the other. But that's sawing. That's not hand planing or
Well,
anything.
well, to that point, yeah, when I'm using a handsaw or, because I love my Japanese saws, so if I'm cutting in off a board, being left-handed, it's a good thing my vise is on the left-hand side.
Right. So right hand side, left hand side.
That would be my
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, you know. There you go. You just got to decide where it's going to go. And the bench I made at home, I still don't have the vise mounted, so that's a whole nother thing because you got to cut a notch in the corner and a spacer and all that stuff. But all right, thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Good to see ya.
Thank you.